I just caught a glimpse of myself on camera and I look straight up out of like the 80s or 90s with this hair tie, especially on like a little side pony, and the leopard print. I'm gonna keep it, but it's so funny. Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm gonna be filming my best books of 2020. I was gonna split this into like favorite nonfiction and favorite fiction separately, and even like maybe do Doctor Who separately, and I've just decided that's too much work. So I'm just gonna do them in separate categories and go like favorite Doctor Who stories I've read so far, favorite fiction books, and then favorite nonfiction. So we're gonna do it all in one video. So there's a very real possibility this is gonna be a really long video. So let's get right on into it, because I feel like there's a lot of books. I didn't actually count them, but it's a decent amount. So starting with the Doctor Who ones, I am not gonna pull this out because this entire thing will fall over, but my favorite of the graphic novels I've read so far has been David's compendium of like, I think it's called 10th Doctor Tales, that whole thing. I really like him in that. I really like his companion Gabby, so big fan of that. And then of the books, or rather the novels, I have really enjoyed The Nightmare of Black Island. Of the ones that I own, this has definitely been my favorite 10 and Rose adventure. And then my favorite like storyline, just because it feels so old school RTD, like Russell T Davies' early Doctor Who years back from 2005, has been Winner Takes All. This is such a fun little romp. It takes place in Rose's time with her family and with Mickey, and it just feels so fun. And it also deals with video games and virtual reality, which is one of my favorite things in books, so I really enjoyed this. I haven't bought it yet. It's a 9 and Rose adventure, and I plan on buying a copy of it soon. Alright, we're gonna get into the fiction favorites. So we're gonna go from least favorite all the way up to favorite, because anticipation. So again, did not order these, don't know what order they're in. They're honestly probably all about the same until you get to like the top 5, and those 5 are probably like solidly all my favorites of the year, and I could not pick between them. Coming in at the bottom of that list is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher, which you will see another one of her books later on this list, but this was probably one of the most entertaining audiobook experiences of my life. Mainly because this main character is so sarcastic. Like, she's very much the type of person that you would see, like a very self-aware person in a scary movie. Like, she's like, oh, of course the woods are haunted. Of course there's a deer that's trying to kill me. Of course my grandma's house is causing all of this. And it's so funny. I also really love the audiobook narrator, so that probably enhanced the situation. Also, I really love this cover. But I think I gave this like a 4.5 when I first read it, and like it stuck in my head so much that I'm probably gonna bump it up to a 5 on Goodreads. But I love this, and I love T. Kingfisher's writing. I feel like my shelves are just like a disaster behind me because I obviously took all of my favorite books off, so there's like gaps everywhere. But next up, we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which honestly, I heard so many bad reviews about this when it first came out that I was kind of hesitant to read it. And then I was like, you know what? I love The Hunger Games. I'm going to read it. Because I remember everybody freaking out when they found out Snow was going to be the main character. Because obviously Snow, President Snow, is a terrible person in the Hunger Games trilogy. So we're like, how are you going to make us like him in order to read him as a main character? And I feel like that's the point a lot of people missed with this book, is that you're not supposed to like him, like at all. You're not supposed to root for him. You're not supposed to root for the romance. It's literally a depiction of a like very toxic romance and a very cowardly bad person of being in Snow's head. So I don't know if people were just confused because like you feel like being in someone's head that you have to like them or what. But I was very, very fascinated by the portrayal of being in someone who's so messed up and clearly a bad person's head. I also really loved seeing how like the earlier Hunger Games took place and the differences between that and the ones in Katniss's time. And I like kind of seeing basically how Snow becomes evil. Like, he was never a good person, but how he became such a bad person. Also, the tie-ins to this, there's a song from the Hunger Games that was very much explained in this that blew my mind when I was listening to this on audio. So I enjoyed this. I gave this 4.75 stars. I don't know why people hate it. I loved it. Next up was a really big surprise because I literally just picked it up on Audible because I was looking for spooky books and did not expect anything of it at all. And that is The Girl from the Well by Rin Chupeco, which I have not bought yet, and I'm mad at myself for not doing it because I really, really loved it. I picked this up because the cover, very obviously, looks like The Girl from The Ring, and The Ring is like one of those really nostalgic, like, scary movies for me that terrified me as a kid, and like I rewatched it during October and it still kind of terrifies me. So I was like, okay, this girl looks like The Ring, whatever, I'll read it, it'll be fun. And I read it, and it was so much about Japanese culture that I was not expecting. You get the perspective of the Ring girl, and it is actually about the girl from The Ring, but like the actual legend that that story is based on, and it was absolutely fascinating. And the first scene that you get from her perspective and not like our main characters was so creepy that I was just in love with it. So I also really like this writing style. I did read the sequel, which was also very good, but not quite as good as this one. This made me very, very interested in Rin Chupeco as an author, so I'm definitely going to be reading more of her books in the new year. And now we're reaching my first effort of not being able to pick between two books from an author, because the next author is Will McIntosh, and I could not pick between Hitchers and Love Sadie because they're so different, but I love them both so much. Like, this one has probably stuck on my head a little bit more, but this one is about a literal pandemic, which we are obviously living in. I read this during the summer when Kate was here. Actually, I read both of these when Kate was here. Me actually reading when I'm with Kate, what is that? But this one is about a slowly becoming apocalyptic world. Sorry, I've been talking for a really long time. Where people are starting to get these like voices stuck in their throat that are not their own voices, and they like come out at certain random points and say stuff that they didn't say. So they're basically being haunted by ghosts. And this is also my favorite, probably one of my favorite covers of all time. Look how creepy that is. I love it so much. And this was just a fascinating like premise for a book, and I obviously read like a ton of Will McIntosh's books this summer, so I love his writing style, but this was so different and so cool to actually, I don't know if cool is the right word, it's so interesting to read from a pandemic perspective during a pandemic and being able to relate to it. And then Love Sadie, this is about, oh, there's a lot of different perspectives. The main perspective is in this world. It's a futuristic sci-fi world. And in this world there are things called bridesicles where women are frozen, like cryo-freeze, and put on to these like sites where you can basically, like, rich men can come and pay to like marry a bridesicle. So it's kind of like a bachelorette thing, but they're cryo-freezed women, and it's so bizarre, but it was really fascinating. There's also a lot of other things going on social commentary wise in this sci-fi world, but it was really interesting to read from, and it's like one of his longer books, and it kept my attention the entire time. Sorry, I got slightly interrupted, don't know where I left off, so we're gonna move on to the next book. I walked out and my family was like, why do you look like you just stepped out of the 80s? And I was like, that's what I was going for. Next up on the best books of the year, we have two very surprising ones. If you don't know, I'm not a huge contemporary person, and it's very rare for them to end up on my favorite books of the year, even when I do read them. But the next one I have on here is One Day in December by Josie Silver, which I read, like, I'm pretty sure at the very beginning of the year. And this is the cutest book I've ever read in my entire life. Like, it's so drama filled, like it feels like it's probably a Hallmark movie, and this is something I would never want to happen in real life. It would be a great TV show or Hallmark movie. Like, I would never want this to happen to me, but it was very, very, very entertaining to watch this happen over the course, because this book takes place over the course of 10 years, which I think helped it so much, so it doesn't feel as like insta-lovey. Like, it makes a lot of sense in the timeline that things happen. And I was listening to this on audiobook, and literally I think I was busy when I was trying to listen to it, and I had to pause it and like just lay down and listen to the last like 2 chapters of this because I started crying. So take that with what you will, but this is definitely probably one of my favorite contemporaries that I've ever read. It's so cute, it's so dramatic, and it was so entertaining. The basic premise is that this girl goes to get on a bus, sees a man, makes eye contact with him on the bus, and it's almost like a love at first sight or just like interest at first sight, and then she spends weeks and months trying to find this man again, like with her best friend, and she can't find him, and she's devastated because she wanted to actually meet him. And then a couple months later she gets introduced to her best friend's new boyfriend, and it's that man that she saw on the bus, and she never tells anyone. They like don't acknowledge that they saw each other because he also felt the connection and everything. Again, sounds so cheesy, but it's so good. Like, I can't even get that point across. It felt like how real people would react to this situation, which I very much appreciated. Next up is another book that I have yet to buy, and that is Jurassic Park, which I watched the Jurassic Park movies back in the day when they came out. They were great. They're very good thriller movies, and like that fun sci-fi thriller atmosphere, obviously island full of dinosaurs. But this book, which I've heard good things about the Jurassic Park book for years. I was like, I probably already know the story, like I've seen all of the movies. And I kept hearing people say that the book is very different, but they have the same feel. So I was like, okay, I'll read it. So I listened to it on audio, and it's probably one of the best paced thrillers I have ever read in my life. The way that the buildup happens is so interesting. The only part about this I did not enjoy is that the children were so annoying. But other than that, this book was fantastic. And I went to try and read the sequel and could not get through it. So I'm not sure that I recommend that, but this first book is incredible. The next up, again, I couldn't really pick between them, and honestly all the Dresden books are so much of a blur. I'm not sure that I would remember exactly which one, but it was definitely the one I read when I was on vacation at Kate's house. And that is, I don't know which numbers they are. The ones that I wrote down as my favorites were Small Favor, which I'm pretty sure this is the one that I love the most. I'm pretty sure. Again, I read like a million Dresden books this year. There are 17, and I probably had only read 4 at the beginning of the year. So they all kind of blend together in my brain. Whichever one is the one, I'm assuming it's this one because it's the one I wrote down, that has Harry Dresden's best friend Michael, who is this super devout Christian with like a wife and a family. And like in this book, it feels so much like the TV show Supernatural in my brain, because faith and the way that Michael treats his Christianity is used as a power in this world where there's like paranormal powers and magic, obviously, because it's urban fantasy. And I loved the way that they talked about faith. I loved the way that Harry Dresden started going on his own little faith journey because of his best friend. And it was just absolutely fascinating for me to see like a good representation of faith and like Christianity in a paranormal book, because normally paranormal books will like just tear Christianity or any sort of religion down and be like, oh, that's fake. But no, it's used so well in this that I give Jim Butcher so many props. And because of this, Michael is my favorite character in the series. Like, obviously I love Harry Dresden, but he's like very much a morally gray character. But Michael Carpenter is like my favorite person in this series. The lighting is getting worse and worse. It's because it's about to snow. Like, I see the snow clouds out there, so I apologize. I might try to turn my ring light on. Is that better? Is it better for me to have different lighting halfway through the video? Who knows? I don't know how long this is going to be, especially since I had got interrupted in the middle of it. But next up on my list, which if you know me at all, this is not a surprise, especially if you heard me talk about it when I first read it. But it's Midnight Sun. Like, I'm that person. Oh no, the ring light's gonna reflect on this so bad. But this is what I wanted Twilight to be. I wanted Edward's perspective. All I wanted from Twilight was more of the Cullens perspectives, because my favorite character is Carlisle. My favorite characters in order go Carlisle, Alice, Emmett, Edward. So being in Edward's head also meant we got to be in everyone else's head, because he can obviously read minds. So this is like everything I've ever wanted from the Twilight world in my entire life, and I was so excited of what was happening. I'm very excited to reread this and like annotate it when me and Kate get to that point in the series, because obviously we've been slowly annotating the entire Twilight series, if you did not know that. But no, I finished this and already wanted to reread it, so this had to end up on my favorite books of the year. Sorry to all the Twilight haters. I know Stephanie Meyer has huge controversies surrounding the Indigenous people, but as a story, this was the perfect one for me. Next one is a weird one for me, because I feel like I read these 6 years ago, because I'm pretty sure I read them in January, which anything before the pandemic feels like it was like 6 years ago. And that is Thunderhead and the Toll. I did read Scythe at the very end of last year, so that is technically not a 2020 favorite, but I didn't make videos in the first half of the year anyway, so you could probably include that in this. But I love this series. This has rekindled my love for Neil Shusterman. These are so fun. The ending of this one, if you have watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the TV show, the ending of this one reminded me so much of the ending of season 2, I think, of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I loved it. But I love, what is his name? Scythe Faraday. In this series, I love that he was a recurring character. I love the characters, but I think the plot of this is what keeps the series going. Like, the characters aren't super in-depth as people, but the world is what keeps the series going, and it's just absolutely fascinating of what if we defeated death and people were appointed to be scythes and how that would become corrupt. If people were given permission to go out and kill people, like, as their job, and how that can be corrupt, or which people would take it in a more moral way. But yes, I love this series. It's probably a little higher than it should be because, like, a lot of the details have escaped me, but I loved it so much that I can't not put them on this list. Next up, if you have been here for most of the year, especially since the summer, you will know that I've become obsessed with John Mars. I even made a video of, like, where to start with John Mars. Not that anybody watched it, but if that does exist, I guess I'll link it down below. But my favorite of his that I have read is What Lies Between Us. I seriously binged all 8 or 9 of his books this summer. He's a thriller writer. This one, I think I have clips of me in one of my vlogs reading the ending of this book and just having my mind blown. And this is a lot like, if you've been on BookTube for a while, there was a time period when people were just, like, refusing to say what Daughter of Smoke and Bone was about because it would ruin the entire story, and that's how I feel about this book. Like, I can't even tell you what it's about other than it's a thriller, and it takes place from 2 different perspectives, and, like, you follow the past timeline and the present. And that's all you need to know going in, because this blew my mind. It's so crazy. I have never read more plot twists in a book in my life. So this has been my favorite of his. Obviously, I love all of his books, so if you want to see my ranking and favorites of those, you can watch my Where to Start with John Mars video down below, but this was my personal favorite, so it had to go somewhere high on this list because I'm so much anticipating his next book, The Minders, which is not out in the US yet, so I think I'm eventually gonna cave and buy it from Book Depository, but I have yet to do that. So John Mars, highest recommendation of, like, anybody this year. Like, John Mars and T. Kingfisher have become my favorite authors very quickly. Next up is Middle Game by Shauna Maguire. If there's one thing you need to know is I, in general, don't like Shauna Maguire. I've tried to read her Wayward Children series, was not a huge fan. I read her Mermaid book that's under a different pen name called Mira Grant. Is that her other pen name? She has so many pen names. But this book, I know it was one of Kate's favorite books of a couple years ago, I want to say. And I didn't know what it was about. I thought it was fantasy. I knew it was about alchemy, and I was like, alchemy's not really my favorite thing. So I put it off reading it for so long. And then one day I was, like, cleaning my room or something, or reorganizing my shelves, and just put this audiobook on. And I was, like, listening, like, for the first couple chapters, like, oh, this is fine. It's about twins. Like, it's whatever, I'll listen to it because I'm not doing anything else today. And then the story hit a point, I turned it very, very sci-fi, and I'm not going to tell you what the sci-fi element was, but it's my favorite sci-fi element, like one of my favorite sci-fi elements, so I was hooked from that moment forward and finished this book within, like, I don't remember how long the audiobook, it's a decently long audiobook, and I finished it that day, like, without stopping. So it's almost made it to my top 5. We're about to get into my top 5 here in a minute, but it's so good. Apparently there's going to be a sequel. I don't know how I feel about the sequel, but I will probably read it because I love this book so much. And now we are into the top 5 of the year. So here's the deal with these. It was really hard for me to rank them because they're all so different. Really, these could be in any order. Like, my number one's probably my number one for a reason, but which I will discuss later. But for the most part, these are my favorite books, like, period. The ranking does not matter at this point. And the first of those is The Warehouse by Rob Hart. This is exactly what I've been enjoying in books for years now. With the social commentary, I think we call it speculative fiction is what we're calling it these days. So, for example, other examples of speculative fiction are The Circle, The Book of M. Those were my 2 favorite books of the last 2 years. And it's basically a very near future, or, like, very early apocalypse tends to be my favorite thing. And this one, it has a lot of social commentary on a company that is somewhat, I am assuming, based on Amazon and how it sounds. And if Amazon became like the monopoly, which they're already kind of a monopoly obviously, but this like takes it to a whole nother level of this guy who built this company. So you get his perspective as he's talking to the workers, and then you get a perspective of someone who is going into the company as a spy, and then you get a perspective of somebody who hates his company because the man who created it ruined his own business because it's a monopoly. So you get these 3 different perspectives, and it's so fascinating seeing this story play out. The different like places you can work, like there's security is one of the options, working in the warehouse, which is where the Amazon part comes in, of like finding items and shipping them out, and then seeing how this man rationalizes his reasons for building the company the way that he did. And it's just so interesting. It has so much social commentary, and I absolutely loved it. I'm very excited to read more by Rob Hart. I literally only picked this up because it was by my favorite audiobook narrator. I found it on Overdrive randomly. I've never heard anybody talk about this book, and it's read by one of my favorite audiobook narrators, which is Emily Wu Zeller, who also narrates the Book of M, ironically enough. I cannot recommend this highly enough if you like either of those books or are interested in social commentary and like just speculative fiction, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah, buy another one of his books, which I think is more apocalyptic, called New York, which I have not read yet, but I plan to get into that trilogy next year. So I'm hoping that I really like this author. Next up, I unfortunately do not own yet because for some reason it's really expensive, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea. The way I've been describing this book to people is, if you are familiar with Team Starkid, the theater troupe, aka some of my favorite people ever and have been for like 10 plus years, this humor feels a lot like Starkid's humor. And I've never read a book where it felt so much like I thought Nick Lang wrote this book with the way the humor went. It's this cute little like orphanage story of this man who like works at a company, and he's like been living his life just in a boring way, and he gets sent to this foster care home of magical children. He's just like there to make sure that everything is up to code at this foster home, and he meets all of these little magical children who all have crazy powers. Like one of them is like the Antichrist, but they turn it into a joke, and that's where the Starkid humor I feel like came in, because it's like this tiny little boy who like thinks he's the devil, and he's just like screaming about death and destruction, and then he would be a cute little boy. And I was like, this is the funniest audiobook experience. Like I highly recommend listening to this one on audiobook. I don't think it would be the same just reading it physically, but I loved this. There's a very cute romance, there's like all this found family aspects, and it just made me so happy. Next up is A Discovery of Witches, which is a book I've been hearing about on BookTube for a million years. Like literally I think since I started BookTube or started watching BookTube, I feel like this was really popular back then, which this book came out in 2011. And I have never in my life read a book that felt like Twilight. Like it literally has the same feel, but with a much more fascinating world. Like I've never read a book so similar in my life. And I was shocked by this because I always put it off because I'm not a fan of like witches generally in books. But the way this world is set up, there are witches, demons, and vampires, and those are the 3 types of magical creatures. And the way that they interact and the way that this world was set up was so fascinating. I am also very much not someone that gets on board with like ships or couples in books at all, and I haven't for many years. Like the only one I have loved were my favorite books of last year, which are the Bone Season books by Samantha Shannon, and like I love the couple in those books. But this one, it's a little bit insta-lovey. It feels a lot like Twilight in that way, but because they're like in their 30s, I feel like it's not as creepy as like 2 17-year-olds. And I just really love like the families. Like we meet Matthew's family, we meet Diana's family in this, and like I loved the found family aspect. I love the world. I like the way that vampires are portrayed. I like the way that the witches are portrayed. Like they're actually interesting and not just your typical like spooky witch type of thing. It feels more like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, if that makes any sense to you if you watched that show as a kid. So I adored this story. I'm very excited. I actually just reread this because I read this in the beginning of the year, like literally in February before the pandemic. So like the details had left my brain at this point because quarantine and pandemic life. So I just reread it literally 2 days ago, and I still love it so much, and I'm so excited to continue on with this trilogy. And then coming in at the number 2 slot, that was almost the number 1 slot, but you'll see why here in a minute, is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This, I expected to like this, which is why I heard about this book, that it was coming out in October, like during the summer. I was like, that sounds really interesting, I'll read it. So I picked up her other book, which is at the bottom of my list, which was The Twisted Ones, and really liked the sense of humor. So I was like, oh, I really like this author. I'm really excited to read her new book when it comes out. So I literally didn't even really look up a synopsis of this before picking it up. And it's about this woman who goes to help her uncle, I believe it is, in this like menagerie museum type of place of like oddities. And she makes a new friend from the coffee place like nearby. One day they're like wandering around the menagerie and find this door. They're in this hole in the wall and they're like, where does that go? And they walk into it and it turns into one of those, it's bigger on the inside. So if you know my love for Doctor Who, the TARDIS is bigger on the inside. If you know my love for the book House of Leaves over there, the entire premise of that book is that there is a hallway within that house that should not be there, like spatially. It doesn't make sense for the hallway to fit into the house. And that's one of my favorite things in books. Like, it's a very specific thing, but it's one of my favorite things in books. So they go into this bigger on the inside hallway, they get stuck there, and they end up in this like in-between world that they end up calling the Hollow Place, and realize that there may be like different dimensions. And the Hollow Places has these like really creepy trees, there's like a bunch of little islands, there's this really scary boatman that like patrols around, and they get stuck there, and then chaos ensues. And on top of all of those things that I really enjoy, it also still had the goofy like inner monologue, of course I'm in a scary movie, of course I'm stuck here with this scary boatman that's probably gonna kill me. Like, he's very self-aware, like horror movie character, and I loved it so much. I also loved the like goofy best friend that she meets. He's so funny. There was literally nothing about this book that I didn't love. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, obviously, since it's at the top of my favorite books of the year list. But I cannot recommend T. Kingfisher enough. If you're gonna start with one of them, I would say start with this one, but obviously I'm biased in that opinion. But I love her books so much, and I'm so excited to read more for her, and I honestly already want to reread this, and I read it in like October. And then last of the fiction books, if you've been around here for a while and heard me talk about this in whatever month I read it, Time is a Social Construct. This book is probably the most personal book to me I have ever read in my life. Like, I am not someone that claims to feel seen in a book or like relates to main characters. Like, I don't need that in a story in general, and it doesn't happen very often. But this book is the best depiction of a emotionally abusive relationship I have ever seen in my entire life. Like, and it related so well to a situation that I was in several years ago that it felt so personal. Like, I want to give this book to people and make them read it to help them understand what it was that I dealt with and like went through, which sounds really dramatic. Like, I am not that dramatic of a person. That is the reason like it's my favorite book of the year, because it's contemporary, it's a cute romance. Like, there is an actual cute romance with a new guy that's happening in this book, but the depiction of her and her ex-boyfriend as she's meeting this new guy is so real to me that it was actually jarring. Like, I'm glad I was in a good mental health space to like read it, because if I was still in that situation, this would be terrifying to read. But because I'm so far removed from it, I am able to relate to it healthily, if that makes sense. It basically deals with this idea that she feels like she's not allowed to, like literally allowed to like a new person or to be with anyone other than that man, which, whew, a little too personal for me. So that is why this book is my favorite of the year. It is contemporaries, which is very unusual for me to be in favorites, let alone the favorite. The romance in this is also very cute. I really recommend it. It's about like two people that share a flat in the UK, in which one of them lives there during the day and one of them lives there during the night, because they have different shifts of their work. So they never really meet like for half the book and like leave each other post-it notes, and that's how they get to know each other, and it's very cute. But yeah, this is my favorite book of 2020. I still haven't annotated this. We have like a day and a half left in the year, so I might do that tomorrow. But I definitely want to annotate this because, again, it's so personal that it actually shocked me. And I went on a huge long rant to Kate about it, and she was like, I recommended that to you like a while ago, but I wasn't sure if you would be able to handle it having coming out of that situation. And I was like, I'm glad that I read it when I did and not any earlier. So those were my favorite fiction books of the year. And then very quickly, I'm going to run through my favorite nonfiction, because I actually read a decent amount of nonfiction in the second half of the year. Like, I low-key participated in Nonfiction November, not even meaning to. And that is something, spoiler for my goals for 2021, I do want to read more nonfiction next year, so this was a good start to that. I have 6 of these to talk about. The first being Promise Me Dad. I'm slowly losing my voice. I've been filming for like an hour and a half. The first of these being Promise Me Dad, which is Joe Biden's memoir about his son. This made me love Joe Biden so much. Obviously, I voted for him. I love him as a person, but I feel like I didn't know that much about his personal life. And this memoir gave me a much better perspective on who he is as a person, which was exactly what I was hoping for going into it, because it's not a super political memoir. It's more about his son and his family life and his personal life, and like how he became actually good friends with Obama when they were in office. And he actually went on a lot of tangents about his faith and how much he respects Christianity and faith in general, which I really, really liked and was not expecting. Next up, I want to mention Wuhan Diary, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. A diary of an older woman who was living in Wuhan, China when COVID broke out, when nobody knew what it was, and how they were all on like a hard lockdown in their homes and could not leave. Like, it wasn't like America where it was like you were recommended not to leave, like you were not allowed to leave your house, and how the community came together and how the government kind of screwed it up and like lied at first, which if you live in the US, that probably sounds familiar. But this was a very fascinating perspective to read, and I do highly recommend it if you can get your hands on the audiobook. Next up is The Girl with 7 Names. This is my favorite North Korean defector story that I have read. I have not. I think I've read like 2. And this is the most interesting because she really gets into the perspective of what you actually believe when you're living and grow up in North Korea, about how you believe that Kim Jong-un is like a god, and like what you're taught in school is not what the rest of the world is taught. And it's absolutely insane how scary it is, and quite frankly how hard it is to get out. So I really, really enjoyed this. I know that she has some TED Talks, which I plan on watching eventually, so big fan of that. I also want to read more of the North Korean defector stories that I know there's several of them out now. Next up, at the very beginning of the year, I'm pretty sure I read Becoming by Michelle Obama. I, like everyone else on the planet, absolutely love this. I love seeing more of her childhood and like her growing up and how she met Barack. And then she also goes into her time in office. And this was just one of the best written memoirs. I also highly recommend the audiobook because she reads it herself. And I just love her and Barack Obama so much as human beings that this is all I wanted in a memoir. I just wanted to hear her story, and hearing her story made me have even more respect for her than I already had. They're just such good, wholesome, smart people, and it comes across. And obviously I miss them in office so much. And then we have a personal favorite, and that is Andrew Lloyd Webber's memoir, Unmasked. Andrew Lloyd Webber is my favorite playwright and like musical composer. Has been since I was a child, because I fell in love with Cats when I was like 5 years old, which is one of his musicals. And this details and chronicles like his writing of his earlier musicals, which is most of his shows. So like it goes through Joseph, goes through Jesus Christ Superstar, goes through Cats, goes through Phantom of the Opera, like how all of these musicals came to be. And as my theater loving heart was just so excited to hear him talking about how he created these, and like also the things that were going on in his personal life while those things were happening were really fascinating to read. And he also very much split this into 2 stories. Like it kind of ended a little bit abruptly where he was like, oh yeah, there's gonna be a volume 2, and I was like, you would be the person to say you're gonna have a second volume of your life story, because if you didn't know, he's still alive. He's very much like a healthy little old man that lives in the UK, and my love for him has definitely been rekindled this year during quarantine, because he was doing The Shows Must Go On and putting up one of his musicals like every weekend for several weeks during quarantine back in like April, May. So this was the perfect time for me to read his memoir. And then last, but definitely not least, and this is the book that I've literally been pushing on everyone since I read it, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the memoir written by the girl who was sexually assaulted by Brock Turner. They had that entire court case that blew up all over the internet because it was insane, and they protected her identity the entire time, so we didn't know anything about her. We did not know she was Chinese American. We didn't know her name, obviously, for privacy reasons on her behalf. And Brock Turner obviously got off with too short of a sentence, or really no sentences at all. And it's her story chronicling how the court cases went and how she was personally affected, how she connected with so many sexual assault victims through the process of her getting so far in the legal system with this, and how her case kind of was the best case scenario of sexual assault cases, which is really kind of horrifying when you think about it, that this is the best case scenario and he got off on like with a slap on the wrist. So this book made me so angry, but in the best way possible, because it's so real and I love her so much. I now follow her on social media. I love her as a person. I respect her so much, and everyone and their mothers should read this book. Whether you are male, whether you are female. If you are female, you will probably relate to this on so many levels in some way. The easiest 5 stars I have ever given a book in my life. Yeah, I think we're literally at an hour of filming. Oh no. But those are my best books of 2020. I'm gonna hate editing this, but I hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know what your favorite book of 2020 was down below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.